So I'd love to get started with our first speaker. MVP is a term he defined. Many of you entrepreneurs are trying to figure it out. I thought it was an appropriate way to start our conference. The day I read the book, it came out, I read it over the weekend. I got enough copies to give one to each of my partners the following Monday. It's an important enough book. It's, in fact, the one book after reading, I thought all my partners who deal with startups should read it. It's important, so please pay attention and please welcome Eric. You will have a copy of his book in your rooms tonight, so, well, Eric, come on up.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, everybody. Oh, thank you. This is my favorite part, actually. Hi, everybody. It's a great honor to be here. I guess you're all used to it now, but it's not every day for me that one of the fathers of the internet and therefore of our modern world invites you to speak at his conference. So, Vinod, thank you. It's a great honor. I did write this book and was very thrilled to have seen the reception that it's gotten. And I thought at his invitation I would share a few ideas from the book. But just a quick ground rule first. I wasn't sure what announcements had been made about your phone, and so I thought I'd just do it, which is to say, please take your phones out and turn them on in case anybody made the mistake of turning it off. Because I don't really want your undivided attention, and I don't want anyone to be disconnected from the internet on my account. I mean, is that even really living? I don't know. So no need for that. Just you can tweet amongst yourselves while I'm talking. I really don't mind. Just please do use the Lean Startup hashtag, because then you can join the worldwide conversation that is happening 24/7 around these ideas, and you don't have to listen just to me. So here are a few ideas that I wanted to share from the book. Entrepreneurs are everywhere. Entrepreneurship is management. We can measure progress in a startup using a concept called validated learning. We can steer a startup using the build, measure, learn feedback loop. And last, we can hold innovators accountable using innovation accounting. And when I'm speaking to a room full of entrepreneurs, this sometimes already is a problem because they're like, wait a minute, this is supposed to be, we're a pretty important meeting here. This is supposed to be about the latest, hottest, greatest stuff about entrepreneurship. And why are we talking about management and accounting, like the two most boring concepts in the whole world? And I know, I'm sorry, it is a little bit boring. And yet, I actually think, if you watch the movies about entrepreneurship, everyone saw The Social Network. It's watching the Facebook IPO, or my favorite entrepreneurial movie of all time, which is Ghostbusters. Anyone seen Ghostbusters? I mean, yes, there's some things about the paranormal that happen, but really it's a business movie about these guys and their startup. And in all of these movies, it's a story in 3 acts, and there's Act 1 about the plucky protagonist and how they came to be in the right place at the right time. And there's Act 3, which is how they divide up the spoils and who sues each other and Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. And then there's a really important act in the middle, which is actually so short you can miss it if you're not paying attention. I call it the photo montage. And it's just the part where people are pounding on keyboards or they're busting a few ghosts. And then they go from first customer right to the cover of magazines. There's never any dialogue in the photo montage. It's only a minute long. And if you think about it, most of you in your companies are in the photo montage right now. You're neither having the great idea right this minute, nor are you already dividing up the spoils. You're here. And so my question is, how come the stuff in the photo montage has no dialogue and it's so short? I stipulate it's because it's too boring to make it into the movie. It's things like product prioritization meetings. Anyone been in a product prioritization meeting recently? Yeah, anyone feel like that would make a really good movie? Right, exactly. So I actually believe we're going to get better at entrepreneurship. We have to get better at the boring stuff. Because most of the decisions that impact the success of companies happens during the photo montage, but the movies don't give us any guidance about what that looks like. So we're going to talk about management and accounting. Sorry for those who wanted something more exciting to start out the day. But there's some really great speakers coming up next, so don't worry. It will get exciting, I promise. So entrepreneurs are everywhere. I just wanted to start with a definition of entrepreneurship, because we're all in startups. We all know what entrepreneurship is, but I think it's important to have a definition. So I think a startup is a human institution designed to create something new under conditions of extreme uncertainty. So what defines us as entrepreneurs is that we don't know who our customer is yet. We don't know what market we're going to go into. We don't know what's going to work. We have at best a series of guesses or hypotheses about what might work. And also, this definition doesn't say anything about the size of our company. So one of the big questions that many of you are struggling with now is, okay, I'm an entrepreneur, and when I was two guys in a garage, we figured out something pretty incredible. But as we have success and our company starts to scale, how do I make every one of the people who work for me into an entrepreneur? Is that even possible, or is a kind of giant bureaucracy our destination? I don't believe it has to be that way. I think anyone who is busy confronting uncertainty is an entrepreneur, no matter what it says on your business card. And that's just a really fancy way of saying that a startup is an experiment, but not the 20th century style experiment, which was, can it be built? We live in a time and a place where we can build anything that we can imagine. And so the dominant question of our time is not can it be built, but should it be built? Is it possible to build a sustainable business out of whatever our crazy ideas are? And the problem is that we are busy wasting people's time on an industrial scale. Because most of the companies that we build, not yours, I understand, but maybe some of the other people in this room, most of the companies that we build are doomed from the start because although the technology may be incredible, there are not enough customers to sustain a business over the long term. And I think the reason we're having this problem of wasting people's time is that we're using the wrong principles of management to run our companies. And I guess I should disclose at this point, while I'm talking about people with doomed companies, I appreciate the invitation today, but actually most of the companies I've ever built in my whole life, most of the products I've ever worked on, even as an engineer, even today, nobody is using them. They're failures. And I know as a professional expert, you're not supposed to say stuff like that, but hi, everybody, I'm a big failure. And if you follow me, you too can be a big failure. I know, but I feel I need to disclose it. But I also feel the need, as a professional expert, to blame it on somebody. Naturally, it's not my fault. So I blame this guy. It's helpful to blame things on people who are dead, incidentally, because they can't argue back. So this is Frederick Winslow Taylor, who invented what he called scientific management, but we just call management. And the problem with Fred Taylor and appreciating him is that to us, his insights are so obvious, we can't believe that they had to be invented at all. Like, for example, the idea that work should be done as efficiently as possible. Okay, I want you to think about a homework assignment. You're to write a polemic in favor of the idea that work should be done as efficiently as possible. And ask yourself, who's on the other side? Who am I arguing against? Who doesn't think work should be done? Well, that actually was an idea that had to be invented. There were people who didn't think efficiency was so important. In fact, we now take it for granted in something that we call tasks, but he called the task plus bonus system, that when you farm out a project to a bunch of functional specialists in functional departments, if they find a way to do their task better than expected, they should be paid a bonus. That is an idea that had to be invented. In the 19th century, I'm not making this up, if you found a way to do your task better than expected, what do we know about you? That you're a liar. Because you could have been doing it the better way this whole time, and you weren't. So you should be penalized, not paid a bonus. And furthermore, what do we know about your coworkers, who are all still doing it the old way? Well, that's liars, the lot of them. So I want you to think about that. Collective punishment for productivity improvement. That was considered the state-of-the-art in management at one time, and what we now take for granted as the way we build our modern global companies and supply chains, those ideas had to be invented. And the problem is that those ideas about management do not serve us well when we're facing the kind of extreme uncertainty that all of you face every day. Because general management fundamentally relies on planning and forecasting in order to work. Because we want to know which managers are ahead of plan, who's doing better than the forecast. That is at the heart of our modern management and accounting systems. But if you think about that, forecasting accurately requires a long and stable operating history from which to make the forecast. Otherwise, we're just making it up, like all the spreadsheets we put in our presentations to VCs. We're just making it up. We have no idea if those forecasts are accurate. But if we don't know if the forecasts are accurate, and who feels like the world is getting more and more stable every day? Nobody, right? The long and stable operating history we need for accurate forecasts is less and less relevant. And so how do we hold people accountable? How do we figure out who's on track? We need a new management toolkit, I call it entrepreneurial management, that is specific to the kind of situations we find ourselves in every day. And probably the most famous and important tool in that toolkit is this thing called the pivot, which I know is a bit of overused jargon that you're probably sick and tired of hearing about, for which I apologize. By the way, just as an aside, I saw this in the New Yorker magazine. I don't know if you can read this caption. It says, "I'm not leaving you, I'm pivoting to another man." So this has escaped the management lexicon and entered the zeitgeist. I don't know what to make of that exactly, but good Lord. Anyway, we can't make sense of entrepreneurship if we don't get honest about the pivot, which is that when great entrepreneurs, they didn't have better ideas than the failed entrepreneurs. If you look at the real stories at the very beginning, you'll find equally dumb ideas at the start. What differentiates the successful from the unsuccessful is that when they ran into difficulty, when things didn't go as planned, they didn't just give up and go home, but neither did they persevere the plane straight into the ground. They did this funny thing where they kept one foot anchored in what they had learned while changing one other thing at a time. And so successful companies take this crazy zigzaggy path, starting out as digital cyber cash for PDAs and winding up being the online payment provider for people buying and selling Beanie Babies. And in retrospect, it seems obvious. But the nice thing with the internet is forever. You go in the Wayback Machine and go read version 1. Go read the original press releases to see if they understood where they were headed. The answer is quite often no. And I understand you know where you're headed and everything's going to be fine, but many of us will have to pivot along the way. And the premise of the lean startup is very simple. The way to think about runway, we usually think about it in how much time do I have left before I run out of money? How many months of burn remain? But I think the right way to think about runway is actually how many opportunities to pivot do we have left? And because of that, there's another way to extend runway just than raising more money, which is figure out systematically how do we get them to the moment of pivoting a little bit sooner. And when we do that, if we shrink the time between pivots, we've effectively extended our runway without having to raise a single additional dollar and therefore not have to suffer any additional dilution. Does that make sense? Okay, at least a few people nodding, that's good. So, validated learning. If we can't hold people accountable in a startup situation by being ahead of plan, how do we hold them accountable? And that's really at the heart of most of the failures I've had in my career. I kept doing in my career a thing I call achieving failure, which is if we're currently busy building something that nobody wants, why are we so proud of having done it on time and on budget? Right? It's like we're driving a car straight off a cliff. We're being like, we're getting excellent gas mileage as we very efficiently drive the car straight off the cliff. I don't know about you, but in one of my startups, first one I did in Silicon Valley, very exciting, very hyped, big, very exciting venture backers. Not at the coastal level, but first tier, venture backers. We spent something like $50 million building our product, having a mega launch, and we achieved failure. We did not have success. But if you had the business plan from that company in front of you, I stipulate you would have the same experience I did. You basically weep to read this business plan. It was so awesome. It was beautifully well written, if I do say so myself. I mean, really, really fantastic. And it had this amazing graph in the back in Appendix B where the spreadsheet lived of the hockey stick shape that we were going to have once we launched the product. And people forget the most important part, defining characteristic of the hockey stick is that long, flat part. Right? So we shipped this product, huge launch, and then we were like, wow, this plan is genius. We're right on schedule. Just like the plan said, we'll have almost no customers for months. Right? Nice, long, flat part. It's about to turn. We're all set. Now, I guess, like I said, it's not going to happen to you, but other people have this experience where, okay, you're a month before the plan said the hockey stick would turn up and to the right. How do you know if you're going to be on a long, flat part forever? Or you're actually going to have that hockey stick experience? That, I think, is the question we have to really get serious about answering. And I didn't know. In most of my companies, we just said, hey, we shipped the features we said we were going to ship. We did what we said in the plan. Everything's going to be fine. That's why it's called achieving failure. You get this positive reinforcement all the way until the day you go out of business. It's really sad. Now, the word lean in lean startup comes from these gentlemen, something called lean manufacturing, a system of management that originated in Japan with Toyota Production System. And the key insight in lean manufacturing is that we have to learn to tell the difference between which activities create value and which ones are waste in our production process. And Deming made famous the idea that the customer is the most important part of the production process, which means we should use the customer's eyes to view everything we do as a company, to say, does the customer care about how much inventory we hold? No, they only care about a high-quality product delivered to them in a timely fashion. But the problem is, how do you apply these ideas if we don't even know who the customer is? When I came to Silicon Valley, I was trained in something called agile software development, which many of you will be familiar with. It's just lean production applied to software. And the key tenet of agile software is you sit the customer with the engineers so that they can always get an authoritative answer to what they're supposed to be building direct from the customer. But who do you sit with the engineers if they don't know who the customer is? So I had this problem. The last company I built, called IMVU, which actually was a success, unlike most of the products I've built, we had this idea, we had this kind of brilliant strategy, another one of these brilliant business plans. When I teach this case in business schools, the MBAs are like finally nodding along when I tell them our strategy, which was we wanted to colonize the hot new social technology of 2004 called instant messaging. We wanted to build the next AOL back when that was still cool. And so we had this idea that, especially in a network effects business, you can't just bring a new network to bear because there's high switching costs because people would have to switch with their friends, and therefore there's a barrier to entry, right? You kind of get the brilliant strategy. So we said, all right, we'll get around that problem by creating an instant messaging add-on that will interoperate with all the different IM networks, and then you won't have to learn a new client. And see if you can visualize this. The best part of this strategy was our product would be inherently viral. Because in order to use it, you had to use it with one of your friends. And I personally wrote the software that would inject an extra button into the UI of the instant messaging client. And then you just push this one button and boom, we transform your boring two-dimensional instant messaging into awesome three-dimensional instant messaging with avatars. Has one extra D, so you know it's better. So can you visualize that? Can you visualize, when you push that button, we send a text link, a URL to the person you're chatting with, and so it's spreading virally through the whole network? Okay. So we built that product. We spent about 6 months building it. We were determined not to have another achieving failure. We were going to ship this product early. And 6 months, if you think about the scope of this product, for those of you who are engineers, right, it's like a virtual world product with 3D avatars and micropayments and user-generated content and a whole online social network and blogging and photo. I mean, you can kind of add up the scope. You say, how'd you do that in 6 months? And we all know the saying, time, quality, money, pick two. Yeah, so you know which two we had to pick, which is anytime engineer says time, quality, money, pick two, that's code for those that don't know for the product I'm building sucks and it's not my fault. Okay, so this product was terrible. Okay, it was really bad. We could barely make it work, and I'd just be totally honest, it'd be more likely to crash your computer than it would be to give you an excellent 3D avatar experience. So I was nervous, and I had advisors who were like, dude, you can't do this. Your career, your reputation is at risk. People are going to think you don't know how to make quality software. I kind of had this image that we would ship this product, and like a newspaper journalist would try it on day one, and they'd write this huge expose, on day one. Idiots at IMVU don't know what quality software means. Never hire them again. And there's my mugshot, in the newspaper or on the 5 o'clock news. So I was nervous. But we didn't want to spend years of our life building something that nobody wanted again. And so we said, all right, we're going to ship it. We're going to see what happens. And I kid you not, I was actually relieved when it turned out that no one would even try it. We couldn't even get people to download the software. So it didn't crash anybody's computer. So I was like, hey, there we go, dodged a bullet. That's great. And I'm like, wait a minute, hold on. Wait, back up. What do you mean it didn't crash anybody's computer? How come customers didn't even find out how bad our design decisions were? They didn't even complain about the features that were missing because customers didn't even want to use the product at all. And like when we would bring customers in for a usability test, you got to imagine there's a kid in our office, and we're like, okay, download this instant messaging add-on. And they're like, no, thanks. It's like, what do you mean, no thanks? Like, I don't know what an instant messaging add-on is. Is it a network or is it not a network? And we're like, no, you don't want to have a whole new network because of the instant network effects and the switching costs. And they're like, what are you talking about, old man? Is it a client or is it not? And we're like, listen, we're paying you to be here. So, you install the software. And we could get them to do that, and we could get them to try the avatar. They like that whole avatar customization. And then we'd say, okay, now it's time to invite one of your friends so that our product can spread inherently virally through the network. And they'd say, no, thank you. And we were like, listen, kid, we've been through this already. We're paying you to be here. And they would say, no, thank you. You can keep your money. Okay, we couldn't pay customers to use this product. Actually, that's how bad it was. And of course, I'm the head of engineering. You know what I said the first time? I said, fire that customer. I said to my co, where did you find this person? We can give me another one. All right, and then 2 customers, 3 customers in a row can't pay him to use the product. 4 customers, 5 customers in a row. And of course, you know what I'm saying. That's not a statistically significant sample. So it turned out to be a very depressing situation. We wound up having to pivot to a standalone network. And that makes it sound really clinical and easy, but can you sympathize with me personally for a minute? That pivot meant thousands and thousands of lines of my beautiful code, my well-factored code, if I do say so myself, excellent test coverage, all those things, all had to be thrown away, and I was depressed. Because I said, wait a minute, why did I even have to be here if all my work was going to be thrown away, right? I was promised waste-free product development, and yet I just committed the biggest waste of all, which is building something that nobody wants. And I felt, gosh, couldn't my co-founders just have been doing the work while I was on a beach somewhere on vacation? Why did I have to be here? And we all know what excuse I used to make myself feel better. The last excuse you use when you're scraping the bottom of the barrel of excuses when you failed to do something. You say, wait a minute, no. If we hadn't shipped this product and customers hadn't hated it, we wouldn't have learned this important thing, namely that we're on the wrong track. So the learning justifies the failure, right? We all know that a manager who claims to have learned something, is generally about to be fired, because it means that you either didn't have a very good plan or you failed to execute a good plan, on both the 2 cardinal sins of management. But that's the best I could do, so I was like, all right, we learned something. And I made myself feel better with that excuse until I had this thought, which was even worse. I was like, wait a minute. if my goal these past 6 months was to learn this specific thing about customers, why did it take 6 months? How come the word learning is only coming up now as an excuse? Right? You know what my co-founders and I talked about during those 6 months, and it wasn't learning. It was, what features do we absolutely positively have to have in version 1, and which ones can we let go? Which bugs must we definitely fix, and which ones can we live with? Which customers should we live with? Of course, what kind of car are we going to drive when we're really successful? None of those things had anything to do with learning, and yet it was the learning that justified the time that we had invested. And I started to ask myself questions like, well, if my goal was to learn, couldn't I have supported only 6 IM networks instead of 12 in version 1? Would the learning have been the same? Yes. What if I'd supported only 1 network? That's an order of magnitude reduction in the amount of code, and yet the learning would have been the same, and that's already pretty depressing. And then I had this thought, which is like, wait a minute. What if I just created a single web page with nothing but a screenshot of the product I proposed to build and a giant download button? Would I even have had to create page 2 where I apologize that the product doesn't exist? Or would a 404 have been adequate? Think about it. What did I say before? They wouldn't try the product. That means they wouldn't click the download button. It means it didn't matter what was on page 2 or page 10 or page 20. And this takes us back to the idea I said right at the beginning, that a startup is an experiment. The way to achieve dramatic reduction in the cost of building things in a startup environment is not to look at the specification like we were all trained to do and say, how do we achieve the spec with minimum effort? But rather, what experiment are we trying to run? What are we trying to learn? And how I achieve that learning with minimum effort. And the way to look at that in a systematic way is using this very simple diagram. I'm from software, so I've written this for software. I know many of you are not, and so you'll have to translate accordingly. But all we do as entrepreneurs is translate ideas into products. When customers interact with those products, that necessarily generates data which we can choose to measure, and from that data we can learn, influencing our next set of ideas. It's a very simple diagram, but it puts the concept of the pivot on a more sure footing. A pivot is one full turn through this feedback loop. That's it. And there are a lot of techniques that are specific to Lean Startup. I'm not going to bother going through this giant eye chart. You can learn more online if you're interested. But all of these techniques, I believe, operate at one specific stage of this feedback loop but have the net effect of minimizing total time. So just like lean manufacturing has a fundamental cycle time, the time between when a customer places an order and we give them a high-quality resulting product, so too entrepreneurship has a fundamental cycle time. How much time elapses between when we have an idea and when we have validated whether that idea is brilliant or more likely crazy. And so a lot of these techniques are not that challenging to implement. Things like continuous deployment, where we put software into production up to 50 times a day on average, rapid split testing, net promoter score, cohort analysis. What's hard is the mindset shift to decide that this is a worthwhile feedback loop to optimize for. I know a lot of you are like, but when's he going to talk about accounting? He promised. So I'm just going to mention this concept called innovation accounting. We don't have nearly enough time to go into any detail because it involves math. But I wanted to just share this idea that accountability really is at the heart of the change that we're trying to make. We can make process improvements, or we can try to improve our culture all day long. You get advice about startups to how to make a better culture. Things like you should have a culture of focus. Very important to focus. And to me, telling a startup to focus is like telling someone who's overweight that they should lose weight. It's like, no kidding. But how? What is the mechanism by which we achieve that? Well, that's what these process issues around how often do we deploy, how do we go through the build, measure, learn feedback loop. Those things are all very important. But they won't work if we're using the wrong accountability system. If our board meetings are still about graphs that are up and to the right, what we call the vanity metrics, the gross numbers, it doesn't work. So I want to propose an alternative accountability system, I call it innovation accounting, where instead of focusing on the gross numbers, instead of focusing on that hockey stick-shaped graph, that we can only make sense of in retrospect, we use forward-looking analytics that can have predictive power about what's going to happen in the future. And since I can't really give you a detailed version of this, I'm going to just kind of give it to you in brief. Everyone has a spreadsheet in the back of the business plan, in Appendix B, in 2-point font. Everybody has that. And that spreadsheet depends on certain inputs. If I had my magnifying glass and I could look in your spreadsheet, I would find a box that says 10%. And if I trace my finger back to the left, what is this 10%? It would say percentage of customers who signed up for the free trial. Now, my claim is that that's not something that should be in 2-point font in Appendix B, but rather in giant font, red letters on the wall. If we don't get 10% of customers to sign up for the free trial, nothing else we do matters. And I know that because if I change that 10 to a 0, I can watch the zeros ripple out, cascading through every other number in the spreadsheet, right? It's a leap of faith assumption that must be true. So the idea of the minimum viable product, or MVP, as Vinod said, one of our famous concepts from Lean Startup, is simply For each of those key inputs, let's go find out what the number is right now, even if that gives us depressing bad news. Because it's better to have bad news that's true rather than good news that we just made up. And so once we have the baseline, the true real data for all of those numbers, we should celebrate, and our investors should celebrate with us, even if that gives us bad news. Then we can move into learning milestone number 2, where we try to tune the engine and try to make those baseline numbers look more like the ideal in our business plan. And last, we can decide if it's time to pivot or persevere. And I'll just leave you with one last concrete suggestion, which is that since we know we're going to have to pivot along the way, let's not have the pivot or persevere meeting at the last minute when there's a board meeting tomorrow and the roof is on fire. Let's just schedule the meeting in advance. Let's just have a regular meeting on the calendar, the pivot or persevere meeting, where we try to figure out if our strategy is working. Remember, a pivot is a change in strategy without a change in vision. So it doesn't mean the company is doomed just because we had a meeting to discuss it. Anyway, I left a lot of questions unanswered because we only had a short amount of time, like how do we know when to pivot and exactly what should we measure? And this last question, can we actually go faster even as we scale? Like any good author, I left these questions unanswered because I heard this is an amazing book that just came out. I hope that you will actually read it, and I thank you all very much. Thank you. Good.
Thanks, Eric. Thank you. I'm going to have you stay for 1 second.
Yes, sir.
I have one question for you. When I gave the last talk of this conference, and it's called Lessons from Years of Screwing Up. It's sort of the complimentary talk to Eric I recognize so much. One of the hardest things I had is I have a slide called Be Obstinate About Your Vision, Not About Your Tactics. I'd love for you to, maybe as you mingle with everybody, answer that question. Because trying to quantify what that means without sort of the experience of screwing up as many times as possible is something I've struggled with. I can normally tell with companies, but I can never explain to them why I think so. So hopefully you'll do that.
Yes.
Thank you very much. You'll all have a copy of his book in your rooms, so please do enjoy it. We are right on time. I do recommend everybody read that book on the flight home. It is incredibly important. There's lots and lots of important lessons. Like I said, it's the only time I've actually handed a copy of a book I read the same weekend to all my partners to read. So do read it. I want to very quickly explain what these wonderful ladies on the side are doing. Can we pull up that board? Yeah. So, never having heard this talk before, in fact, let me do this. They did in real time a summary of the talk. It is pretty amazing. And at the end of the conference, you'll see all these talks. We did this last year, and it was amazing. But the idea for this came from me watching all these videos and wanting to know what it is, what is inside these videos without having to watch them. In a photograph or a text page, you can scan it quickly and decide whether you want to read it. In videos, you can't. So this goes in the front of these videos. As these videos are posted on our website, you can very quickly see if you want to invest a half hour into watching the video. So please keep an eye on these wonderful cartoons, if I can call them that.